In this presentation, I will be talking about descriptive assumptions. Descriptive assumption is the beliefs about the way the world was, is, or will be. So I'm going to use the same formula that we used for value assumption. We're also going to use the same formula when it comes to descriptive assumption. However, in this case, when we are identifying descriptive assumptions, we are trying to identify things that we believe that is true about the way the world was, is, or will be. While value assumption focuses on what the author's value preference is, descriptive assumption focuses on what we believe to be true. And so to make this easier, whenever you are asked to identify the descriptive assumption, always use the phrase that I provided in the parentheses. For this reason to be true, I must believe. So in our textbook, the author gives us an example of a model car that is reliable. So the author presents his or her first reason and says that this model car has functioned well on multiple occasions for years. Therefore, the author's conclusion is that this particular car will get you where you want to go. Remember that the assumption, which is the missing add-in, is the link between the reason and the conclusion. And the assumption is what strengthens this argument. So for us to make the reason and the conclusion stronger, I need to identify the descriptive assumption. What do I believe must be true in order for the reason, which is this model car has functioned well on multiple occasions, therefore this particular car will get you where you want to go. So for this reason to be true, I must believe that this model of car has a consistent quality. Do you see there where it says it has a consistent quality? See, I believe that a car that is reliable and can get you wherever you want to go is a car that has a consistent quality. That's my descriptive assumption. And if that is the case, if this is true, that the model car that the author is making an argument about is consistent, does have a consistent quality, then it strengthens this argument right here. Now, let's look at another example, the same example, but another descriptive assumption, because you can have more than one descriptive assumption for the same argument. Let's look at this next one here. Now, let's go ahead and look at the same example, but this time, let's look to see at a possible alternative descriptive assumption. So once again, the reason is this model car has functioned well on multiple occasions for years. Therefore, this particular car will get you where you want to go. To strengthen this argument, another possible descriptive assumption can be, for this reason to be true, I must believe that the driving that would be done by this new car is the same kind of driving that was done by the person recommending the car. You see, what the author is trying to, in the explanation or textbook for this descriptive assumption, the point that the author is making is that if this reason, meaning that this model car functioned well multiple occasions, well, what are those occasions? Are you making long road trips, like long distance trips, or are you just going to the grocery stores and back? See, if this is true, if the author's argument is true, then I must believe that the kind of driving that the author is doing, which is not clear, so we don't know what it is, it has to be the same kind of driving that is happening in all situations for this car to truly be reliable. Because see, if the author is just driving to the grocery store and back and says, look, this is a reliable car, well, what if my kind of driving is long distance? So if it has to be the same kind of driving that's happening in order for the reason to truly support the conclusion. So again, you can have more than one kind of descriptive assumption, but it just has to be a logical link between the reason to the conclusion. We're going to be doing a lot of examples in here, so you will sort of begin to understand how to find descriptive assumptions. Once again, remember that when we're looking for the descriptive assumption, we're looking for the reason plus what must you believe to make the reason true. That's the magic question here to help you find the descriptive assumption. Therefore, the reason and the conclusion is strengthened and makes this argument valid. So the mystery question is, what must you believe to make the reason true? All right, so let's look at our first example. Take a moment to go ahead and pause and read this example to yourself. Now, I'm going to identify one of the reasons, and one of the reasons given in the argument is that psychological closure can be achieved by finding answers to enduring questions. Therefore, now jumping to the conclusion, adopted children should be allowed to find their biological parents' identities. Now, what must I believe to be true that psychological closure is needed, can be achieved when in question that has been a mystery and needs answers, okay? If those questions are able to, if those questions are answered, then psychological closure can be achieved. So because of this, the author's arguing is saying adopted children should be allowed to find their biological parents' identities. Well, for this reason and conclusion to be strengthened, I must believe that the child is bothered by not knowing their biological parentage. That is just a logical descriptive assumption. This is implying that if a child does not know who their biological his or her biological parents are, then the child is finds no closure. And so to strengthen this argument, I have to conclude that the child is bothered by this. And so if this is true, then this strengthens the argument. So as a critical thinker, what you would question is it true that all children are bothered by knowing their biological parents? If it's not true, some children may not care, then this makes an argument weak. But if you say yes, children are bothered when they don't know who their biological parents are, then it does strengthen the argument. Do you see how these descriptive assumptions are helping you think more critically? Okay, so let's look at another example. Once again, go ahead and pause the video, take a moment to read this example to yourself. In this example, one of the reasons the author uses to support his or her conclusion is that evidence fails to show that anti-anxiety drugs are addictive. Therefore, jumping to the conclusion, anti-anxiety drugs are desirable for the mental health of many modern women. So to find the descriptive assumption, I'm trying to figure out the missing link, okay? And here, the one keyword that pops up, that pops out to me is the word evidence. So if the author is talking about evidence, then that means that there is some kind of study that has been done, okay? So again, the reason says evidence fails to show that anti-anxiety drugs are addictive. So for this reason to be true, what must I believe about studies that have been done? For this reason to be true, I must believe that studies have reported there is no correlation between the use of anti-anxiety drugs and addiction. And because there's no correlation, okay, then the conclusion is that anti-anxiety drugs are desirable or preferable for mental health of many modern women. Now, once again, as a critical thinker, you're going to step back now and you're going to see if this descriptive assumption is true. Is it true that studies have reported that there are no correlation between the use of anti-anxiety drugs and addiction? If that is true, then it strengthens the argument. But as a critical thinker, if you have maybe read about other studies that have report some kind of correlation, then you're going to say, whoa, hold on. I have seen some studies that report correlation between the use of anti-anxiety drugs and addiction. Then now the argument is weak. Okay. All right, let's do one more example here. Go ahead and take a moment to read this to yourself. Pause the video. So in this third example, the author provides one of the reasons for why planning should be required for students. The author says students will become goal-oriented. And because of this, then the author concludes that planning should be requirement for students, and the best way to accomplish this goal is to require them to use a planner. Well, ask yourself, what is the missing link that's going to strengthen this argument? Okay, for this to be true, I must believe, what do I believe about the use of planners and becoming goal-oriented? How am I going to make that connection together? So one descriptive assumption I can come up with is that for this reason to be true, I must believe that using a planner can induce a goal-oriented mindset. All it's really saying is that if students use, I have to believe that when a person uses a planner, it's going to make them be more goal-oriented. So now as a critical thinker, you're going to step back and ask yourself, well, is that true? Do we believe that? If a person uses a planner, they're going to become more goal-oriented. If you say, I use a planner and I'm still not goal-oriented, so that's not true, then therefore this weakens the argument. But if you say, yeah, people who use planners tend to be more goal-oriented, and this is true. If that's the case, then it strengthens the argument. It strengthens this argument. So to wrap up a brief summary of the difference between value assumption and descriptive assumption, I want to just briefly give a quick summary of the difference between the two. When you're looking for the value assumption, you are simply trying to identify the possible conflicting values within an argument. Once you have identified the conflict values, then all you need to do is clearly state the value assumption, which is the author's value preference or priority. However, with a descriptive assumption, all you're trying to do is identify the missing link between the reason and the conclusion that is used to strengthen the argument. So if you look at the example I provided, in order for this statement, mankind is evil, to be true, I must believe that every person has the potential to harm others for personal gain. Now, the key word here is I must believe. It doesn't mean you believe that every person has the potential to harm others for personal gain, but in order for the statement mankind is evil to be true, this is what you must believe. However, as a critical thinker, now you're going to say, well, do I really believe every person has the potential to harm others for personal gain? If you say, no, I don't believe that, then this statement is not true, or it weakens the argument. And that's all that descriptive assumptions is trying to help you, that you're trying to figure out by using the descriptive assumption. It is for you to, once you have identified what the descriptive assumption is, you can use the descriptive assumption to help you decide if this argument is weak or if it is strong.